My name is Jake. I will be your judge. So, with the motion that reads, this House, as Pope Francis, would allow priests to marry. Without further ado, I now call on Prime Minister to start this debate.
Mr. Speaker, we believe in the power of religions to engage and interact with social discourse. Especially, we think that should come from the leadership culture of that religion, like Pope or in High Priest. We think the obsession on the conservative doctrinal values and relying on absolutism is anachronistic and it damages the church in general. So what do we want to do on side opposition? We're going to strictly adjudicate this debate in the perspective of Pope Francis and tell you why allowing marriage for a high priest is better for the religion, better for the political consistency and the social discourse that this religion is having and interaction with the society. Obviously, Mr. Speaker, we have to recognize that we're not forcing these high priests to marry. If they can't find someone that they truly love, or if they disagree with the idea personally to say that they should be fully devoted to religion, therefore they should not have a family, we think that's also fine. They can choose not to marry. But in the perspective of Pope Francis, we are not going to systematically discourage and disallow marriage for high priests. I'm going to talk about three things in my substantive page. Number one, why there's a massive constructive value in celebrating marriage and reproduction, and priests are no exception to that. Secondly, I'm going to talk about why religious discourse can change while interacting with social discourse. And finally, I'm going to talk about, while in that interaction, why Pope Francis has a special incentive to prioritize the value of marriage over other religious conservative doctrines. So let's firstly move on to my first argument as to why there is a massive constructive value in celebrating marriage and reproduction, and why priests are no exception to that. Two reasons why. Number one, we think the essence of religion, the essence of Catholic Church is to spread love and loving yourself, loving others, and have social love and various forms of love, right? We think marriage is deemed as a consummation of love, Mr. Speaker. It's important to recognize that the spreading of core value, which is love and peace, largely comes from your family values while constructing the identity of a child, or for example, having a loving relationship with your partner. But the second reason is also that marriage is closely intertwined with the value of reproduction, which can easily be defended by Catholic Church logic and the doctrines of Catholic Church. We think the construction of family and the practice of doctrines in real life, of showing love and have good child rearing and showing good examples of that, is impossible for these high priests. And we thought that was quite ironic. So there's a massive constructive value, and as we can see from our position, they pretty much agree with that. So let's secondly talk about why religious discourse can change and why it's better for high priests to adopt this value and practice that in real life, when we do agree that this is a core value of Catholic Church. We believe that there is a holy scripture called Bible that we should all abide by when we are sincere believers of Catholic Church. But that doctrinal interpretation of that holy scripture can differ from people to people while engaging with your social discourse. This is because when you believe in a religion, when you're a continuing entity, when your moral social values are constructed in a specific setting and the framework of your society, you are not free from thinking in that specific way of having that moral construct. So your social status and your social moral values also affect how you view that religion. That is why, although the Bible do not change as of itself, the interpretation of Bible can have social discourse and change, and people can adopt different social values according to that interpretation of Holy Scripture. We see a lot of examples, Mr. Speaker. Back in the days when America was having civil war, it was quite counterintuitive to say that it was Christian church that defended slavery, because many Southerners believed in Christian church in the southern part, like Texas and Arizona, and they were politically defending slavery, right? But we, as of now, as social discourse engage with religious doctrines and religious discourse, we don't see any Catholic church or any Catholic people defending slavery in contemporary society. This shows that there is a prospect for religious discourse to evolve according to social discourse. We also pointed to examples of Islam religion, where in the conservative Muslim communities, they do things like female genital mutilation, but as they adopt humanitarian values and modern liberal values, they tend to abandon those horrible practices, and they start educating young girls. Although Muslim doctrine and Quran says that young girls should be discouraged from having things like Western education. All these examples show how religious discourse can be changing and evolving, engaging with social discourse. We think marriage is a perfect example for that. Let's finally move on to my most important argument as to why in the perspective of Pope Francis, it is ever more important that he prioritizes his value of celebrating marriage and reproduction over other conservative doctrines that religion has. 3 reasons for this. The first is that the characterization of Pope Francis is that he's politically progressive and he has to keep his political consistency to have integrity inside his religious community. Like he has to remain principally consistent. Like we can point you to 3 examples. Number 1, Mr. Speaker, he challenged the idea of the existence of purgatory to cleanse of people's sin inside Catholic Church. That's very progressive, as many conservative Catholics backlash on Pope Francis for the idea. But secondly, he actively apologized for the atrocities and persecution that Catholic Church had upon homosexuals and gay people. And given that many conservative Catholics believe that homosexuality is a sin, we believe Pope Francis especially have a progressive value in leading that social discourse revolving around their religion. Third example is that Pope Francis said that abortion cannot always be seen as sin, although he did not agree with legalizing abortion. All these examples show why Pope Francis specifically have progressive consistency in defending social discourse that revolves around the religion of Catholic. The second reason, more importantly, is why Pope Francis is doing that. We believe that when a religion is not relevant, when a religion is not actively engaging with the social discourse of contemporary values, they lose relevance, they lose popularity, that is a significant harm to that religion. Like Christian priests are allowed to marry, Mr. Speaker. And if you lose relevance, and given that there are many branches of Christian churches, and given many branches of Christianity to begin with, the conservative Catholic Church is losing relevance and losing their power and their dominance over spreading their doctrines and spreading their religion and over having power and influence over the society. We think Pope Francis is afraid of that, and that is why he has such high incentive to revolve around the social discourse while having that religious discourse inside community. Having that leadership culture show that religious authority, saying that having progressive interpretation of your doctrine is actually fine in today's debate, is a very good thing and a positive constructive value that we want to defend for a side proposition. Mr. Speaker, the third and final reason simply relies on the fact that Francis is a pope. He's the biggest religious authority in Catholic Church, which means that when he has that religious halo and authority of how to best interpret the God's word, Mr. Speaker, that will bring about positive impact and tangible changes as it is happening already right now. So as in the perspective of Pope Francis, we're very happy to let those high priests marry and have children.
Next, Prime Minister, and I'll call the Leader of Opposition, Your Worship.
Mr. Speaker, when we are debating on a motion, not upon all religion itself, but instead upon Pope, and especially we're debating upon a certain religion that is called Catholic, we believe that it is very essential to tell you and characterize what Catholic is, what is their unique identity, which I believe was not quite elaborated by the Prime Minister. We believe that what differs Catholic from any kind of religion is that when it's centralized community and their consistency. How Catholic works, other than kind of churches or other Protestants, is that they have this certain doctrine upon themselves. Priests has to follow that rule in order to become a priest. Such as in Korea, if you want to become a priest, unlike other Protestants, you can just simply become a priest and become one of those God's word senders. When it comes to Catholic, you have to graduate and be educated from Catholic universities. When it comes to building churches, you cannot just simply build a church just because you own that certain land, but instead you have to build that church upon the Catholic rules. That is to say, within a certain district, there has to be one church within the district. Then you cannot build any kind of more things. That basically shows that how Catholic is run. It is run by a central community that has a very high consistency. We believe that is a unique characteristic that stands Catholic, no sir. stands Catholic from other religions, we want to keep that promise very proud to close. So, firstly, moving on to some responses. Firstly, when it comes to Bibles, when it comes to discourse, we believe that that should not happen when it comes to Catholic churches, as we believe that consistency is one of the main reasons and one of the things that they have to go for. As we have told you, if they did not want that consistency, why would they have ran for the centralized community in the first place? Therefore, that sense does not count. And secondly, telling to me and telling to the opposition side that about Pope Francis, he has to be persistent and consistent upon his progressive values. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to tell you that those changes that he has made upon is upon followers. However, when it comes to this motion, this is basically breaking down all that structuralized, centralized rules that Catholic Church currently possesses. This is a way different characteristics that the Pope Francis kind of wants to argue. We do not believe that example kind of expands upon, actually changing the whole structure of Catholic itself. Now, moving on to my argument is, firstly, we want followers to believe in Catholic. However, before moving on, yes, sir.
Well, apologizing to gay people is already in the front to that structure. But moreover, we've seen popes, for example, like Pope Celestine and Pope Boniface, have married in the past. Why is this doctrine particularly so important?
Why is this doctrine? As we have told you, that some amendments can be made, and they have been made upon, such as you guys have given an example of an abortion. Alright, that does not exist on priests in the first time because they cannot get married. It is only upon those followers who believe in them. Therefore, we believe those amendments that is being made by the Pope, and you guys tend to believe that they are progressive, is only made upon those followers, which this does not fit in within this motion. As I told you, this is a motion that is basically destructing the bone structure that current Catholic exists. So that does not count as well. Now, as I've told you, why does that weaken followers within Catholic churches? Catholic is consistent of various unions, various branches. There are Francis branches, current our Pope is upon, of Jesuit branches, okay? So, they are forming this sort of a union when it comes to, this kind of centralized community. What impact does this have when this Francis Pope changes this? Firstly, since Francis Pope, as I've told you, is upon Jesuit branches, which is one of the minorities when it comes to Catholic communities, his impact when it comes to changing his, the rules and basic structures of Catholic, what happens to other societies, other branches, is that instead of obeying those laws, they will simply deter from joining that Catholic community as a whole. I'll tell you why. Firstly, when it comes to priests, it is basically, sacrificing his entire life upon God, upon those doctrines that he believes is right. However, so he believed to be a church within Catholic, not upon other kind of Protestants or other religions, because he loves that morality, he loves that centralized community, he loves that without any kind of corruption, corruption-free religious system. Right? That is what led priests to become priests. However, when the Pope comes out, and one of those minority party Pope comes out and says that, all right, I'm just going to change it because our party believes that we have to marry, then they will simply deter because that is basically objecting the belief that they have lived upon throughout their life. Firstly, that's going to happen. So, all those, as we have told you, there are various branches. Within the branches, there are certain believers. The believers is going to split themselves up. And secondly, it's going to further deter people from following or believing in Catholic churches. Firstly, because within some nations, people believe Catholic because it is highly related upon his morality, what the things that he valued the most. However, this is basically going against and fixing all that morality, basically telling or signaling those citizens that, alright, this is not a consistent society anymore. It can change upon what the Pope comes out. Therefore, what they do is simply, once they believed in Catholic because they were so consistent, they believed in Catholic because they have the same moral values. However, since they say that, alright, I've believed in Catholic for 10 years, but just if they change the Pope, I have to change all the morality values that I lived for. To have further deterrence from them joining Catholic, weakening Catholic's power within our society. Secondly, it provides a precedent when it comes to Pope, further snowballs the effects of making Catholic hindering Catholics' rules. Right, once Pope Francis makes an amendment to this kind of policy, basically we tend to believe that this is about his own party's value. What happens is that Pope is always elected like a president, so when the next Pope comes out, what he's basically going to say, just like the old stories that we used to learn as a Korean student, saying, God, Sir King, Your Majesty, you should not look at, histories of what historians wrote about you, because once you see them, other kings is going to see them. That is exactly what's going to happen within Catholic churches. Once a pope has made an amendment, it provides a justification for other popes to make an amendment, basically hindering the entire community Catholic Church as well. And finally, we believe that Pope should be chosen upon his religion, not upon his party color. He's a leader. Pope, why Pope is so important is that he is the head, he's the king of Western Catholic churches. That is to say, he's not based upon what trench he's come from, what political values he pursued for, but instead he's chosen upon his moralities, his beliefs in God, how he knows Bibles. However, since when these kind of motion passes, it is basically to say that Pope can make amendment whenever he wants. That is to say, that, all right, now it's going to be a political party. I'm going to make a leader that can actually have a power upon them, who can actually express his feelings upon those social people. You're not going to choose Pope anymore upon those religious or upon those morality values, but instead upon his power or upon his values that is politically effective, basically going against Catholic itself. Very much.
Thanks, L.O. I now call on Deputy Prime Minister.
The fact that the Catholic Church relies on a central authority does not preclude the idea that community values can change. You can still maintain a strong community without necessarily stringently upholding community values that have persisted for decades and centuries. If social trends are changing, we think that religious trends should be changing as well, because ultimately religion is composed of individuals who live in society. It is impossible to ignore the social discourse that's going on. So I'm going to be talking about two things in my speech. Number one, why it's better for priests to set an example of leading a family, why that's beneficial to the religion itself, but second of all, why it's ultimately going to discourage unhealthy practices such as sexual abuse within the clergy. But before that, two questions that I want to ask in today's debate. Number one, is this an appropriate modification of the